Again, a short welcome to the first EuroWeb Book Corner presenting Ieva Pigozne's book on colors and their meaning. And now, as I said, Francisco Gomez, EuroWeb's Science Communication Manager, will introduce today's speaker. And I will be your host for this session. And if you have questions, please put them in the chat. And of course, feel free to ask them yourself after the presentation. Have fun with our first Book Corner.
So, good afternoon, everyone. Good evening too, because we've heard before that there are people from quite different parts of the world here today, so quite a lot of different time zones. I would like to start by welcoming all of you too, and especially to give a warm welcome and to express our gratitude to Ieva for having accepted to participate and to be the pilot experiment in this EuroWeb Book Corner, with a presentation of a recently published book just a couple of weeks ago, I think, Colors and Their Meanings between the 3rd and the 13th century in Baltic Dress. So Ieva, a lot of us in EuroWeb are somewhat familiar or very familiar with Ieva's work, but anyway, she works at the Institute of Latvian History of the University of Latvia. She has recently been doing a postdoctoral research project on the development of folk dress in Eastern Latvia in the 19th century, so a little bit more recent than the subject that we are going to hear about today. But before that, she did her PhD thesis on this subject, on this earlier phase of Baltic dress in Latvia, which resulted in this wonderful monograph that we are going to hear about today. I don't want to say anything else about this research because I'm quite sure that Ieva is going to tell us all about it with much more detail. So without any further ado, I will hand over the floor to Ieva, thanking you again for your availability to be with us today and to talk a little bit about your book. Thank you, and the floor is yours, Ieva.
Well, thank you. So hello to everyone. Greetings from Riga, from Latvia. And yes, I will try to present my book, but I want to warn you that I'm not going to tell everything about it, just some insights. And I'm going to share a little presentation so that I have a background for talking. Can you all see it? Okay. All right. So yes, as you already mentioned, this is a book that is based on my doctoral thesis. I defended it in 2016, and since then I have been working a little bit on other topics, and I have taken something away from the thesis and I have added some things, and in the end this book was published, and for the last more than 3 years I have been working with other topics. So this is something for me like looking back at what I did from 2004 to 2016. And I want to say that this book is in Latvian and in English. So the text goes in 2 parallel columns, so you can read every single sentence in both languages. So I guess for anyone who wants to read it, it's as available and as accessible as it would be in Latvian. So I'm really happy for that, and that makes sense to present it to you as well. Just to show where we are based and what we are talking about, Latvia is in the middle of the 3 Baltic countries on the shores of the Baltic Sea, and the Baltic tribes are the 4 that you can see there: Curonians, Semigallians, Selonians, and Latgalians. And these people are those that I have been researching. And the study is based on the data from these people, not from the Finno-Ugric tribes that also have been living in Latvia, but as they have different folklore material, I wasn't using their archaeological records either. but there was enough data anyway. And just a little bit of approach is that why I chose this topic. It was because in order to gain an understanding of how any kind of ancient clothing could have looked like, you need to know several things. First of all, what garments did the dress consist of and what was their cut? What techniques and materials were used to make the garments and the pieces they consist of, including ornamentation. And these two topics are much more researched in Latvian archaeology than the third one, what were the colors of the garments and the textile elements used in their ornamentation. So this is why I chose it, because I wanted to gain a full picture of the topic. And probably that was also just my curiosity that made me choose this topic. And it wasn't very much researched before, but some of the work had been done. But well, it was quite innovative for Latvia. So what I would like to also say that color contains many aspects. Sometimes people think just, oh, color, but color is a combination of both practical or material and psychological or intangible aspects. And the material aspects are, of course, like brightness and saturation, and how noticeable the color is, how long it remains clean, how easy it is to wash it, etc. Other practical considerations are connected to dyeing and the availability of dye stuffs and dye plants, and the dyeing techniques is very important. And as I have noticed that dyeing with plants in Latvia is a living tradition. However, all the techniques that are more difficult to use and to learn are dying out first. So the easiest remain living for a longer time. The psychological aspects include concepts of the meaning, prestige, mythical perceptions, of course, taste, fashion, what is fashionable at that time. And many of these aspects I have been trying to address in my research. Here you can see the map of Latvia and where the textile fragments that I have analyzed come from. There are altogether 227 pieces of yarn or fabric that I have analyzed, but they come from these 35 places of excavated archaeological sites. And what I have been trying to do in the study is to find out what these colors originally could have looked like, or what colors there were, how they could have been obtained, and what their meaning in clothing could have been. So just a couple of words about sources and methodology. The book starts with the analysis of the archaeological sources. So the archaeological textiles from the territory of Latvia, as I already mentioned, that come from the Baltic tribes from the 3rd to the 13th century. These materials and these fragments have been analyzed. So there is, of course, no written or iconographic evidence about dyeing textiles from this time. So what I have tried to do is to combine this with the traditional dyeing recipes and traditional dyeing practice and knowledge. So all that material is analyzed in combination to what could have been used in earlier times. So no chemical mordants or dye stuffs are used in the recipes, and in that case, if they are not used, I have studied these recipes and tried to understand the ways they were used, what kind of vessels were used, what kind of water was used, etc., etc. And the third part, and probably now my favorite part, is the analysis of the folkloric evidence. So that is texts from various genres of Latvian folklore. And I have tried to combine these with the information coming from the archaeological sources and the ethnographic sources. And of course, many people who learn about that are sometimes worried about the dating of the folklore material, but I will tell a couple of words about it later. So first of all, I will show you just a couple of photographs of the archaeological evidence that we have from the Latvian territory. And sometimes they are very well preserved in large pieces. And mostly this good preservation is thanks to the inwoven bronze rings and spirals, as you can see them in the picture here. And what is also helpful is that bronze jewelry was very popular at that time. And when people are buried with all the jewelry, so where jewelry touches the textiles usually survive much better. This, of course, has a consequence that where there is no jewelry in the grave, there's no textiles. So in that way, we don't know much about the clothing of the poorer people. We only know about the people who have quite a lot of jewelry and quite a lot of ornamentation in their textiles. But there is quite good evidence that probably the clothing of the poorer people looked quite similar, only without these decorations. I write about that in the book. And one of the places where we have textiles that don't belong to a grave, they come from a hoard that was buried in the bog in the Western Latvia, and all the textiles from there look quite similarly made. So in that regard, we can see that the tradition of making textiles was quite similar for the textiles buried in the graves and used for other purposes. And this example, what I'm showing you right now, is quite interesting because it has got a tablet woven band, and it's mended. And as you can see, it's mended quite disgracefully. And this is one of good arguments, one of the good arguments to think about whether these textiles were used only in the graves or they were also used for more occasions. Sometimes people argue that maybe these clothing textiles were used for weddings as well. There's a tradition of that in Latvia until the 19th century, that the wedding attire was also used for burying people. But at the same time, here we can see that this piece of shawl has been used quite many times. and otherwise it wouldn't have been damaged. And this means that this kind of shawl must have been used many times during the lifetime of the person who was wearing it. And I will show you just a couple of other examples. These are quite well preserved, and as you can see, we can observe the colors even with a naked eye. So the fabric is dark blue dyed with woad, and the tablet woven bands include red and yellow and also dark blue, and sometimes also two different tones of red, as in this case. So there are some other pieces just to show you how much the textiles remain untouched when the bronze is there. And when the bronze doesn't affect them, then they disintegrate. And this is a piece of a leg wrap that's coming from the hoard I mentioned. And as you can see, it doesn't have any decorations with metal, but as we all know that bogs are very suitable for textiles to remain for a longer time. And this is why this piece of clothing has also survived. And we can also see that the way it was made is quite similar to the other textiles. And this is a piece of a head ornament for women. And here we can also see the colors of the yarn that's inside the head ornament. So it's dark blue and red. And apparently where these spirals were opening, it was possible to see the colors. So I guess it was made intentionally. So here we have some results of all the colors that I have found in these 227 examples I have studied. So most of them come from fabrics, especially blue color, but of course ornamentation is also here, and blue, red, and yellow are also used in the ornaments of the clothing, or the textile ornaments of the clothing. And one of the most interesting information that's coming from here is the last column that shows the date. So we can see when each color appears in the archaeological material of Latvia. And yellow seems to be the youngest color used in textiles. And as you can see, for example, there is no green. And I also have a small chapter in the book where I write about later centuries and what colors appear when in Latvian textiles until the 19th century. So green appears only in the 18th century. And as I already mentioned, so my favorite part, the analysis of the folklore texts. I have really spent more than 10 years on this part, and I've analyzed about 100,000 folklore texts. And Latvian folklore archives contain more than 3 million units, and it's an absolutely unique collection. And some of these texts really date back to a very long time, especially when you think about the information they carry. And dating of folklore material has been researched quite a lot. And as you can see, people have come to conclusions that evidence from many centuries is stored there, but the earliest perceptions may come from not only iron and bronze, but even Stone Age. So I have personally seen such texts quite a lot, especially folk songs, which are sometimes the oldest they carry the oldest information, where people are singing about perceptions that really correspond to the Stone Age mythology. And this is why it was also possible to use folklore material for combining it with the archaeological and ethnographic data. And in order to show you just a couple of examples, for example, the color red and yellow are very interesting, but I'm not going to show you anything about it because I want you to read about it. But I'm showing you just one example of the folk songs that sings about or that mentions a brown coat. And it's a mythological song where a man, a hero, is fighting with the devil's mother, and then he asks the Latvian female deity Laima for advice what to do in order to get the blood of the devil off his coat. And such very old texts sometimes reveal the traditional meaning of the colors, especially, as I said, red and yellow, but also brown, as it suggests that it's a color of protection, of the military, and so on. And here I have just a couple of examples of the color blue. And first of all, some riddles to which the answer is the sky and stars. And probably no wonder, because if we look at the reconstructed shawl on the other side of the slide, we can see that it really reminds of the dark night sky with stars. So these riddles that have been recorded probably in the 19th century or the beginning of the 20th century, they confirm that. And also a small folk song text where a blue coat is together with a silver brooch that is like a moon. And if the blue coat is the sky, so the brooch is the moon. And a fragment of another mythological folk song. We have quite a lot of variants of this song, where the hero climbs up to the heavens and meets God's sons and what he's doing there. And also there we have indications that the color blue is associated with climbing up to the sky or to the heavens, or symbolic dying and going up to the heavens and then coming back again. So here we have just a short summary of the meanings of the colors. And the red usually symbolizes blood, and as thus it symbolizes the force of life and protection. And if a person's clothes are decorated with red, then it means probably protection and readiness to go to war for a man or to be married for a woman. So the meaning of yellow is usually linked with the symbolism of young women and the fullness of harvest, but at the same time, the loss of life force in autumn, when the colors when the leaves on the trees turn yellow and then fall down, and then the winter frost is coming, and it's some kind of symbolic dying every year. And sometimes also color yellow is a synonym of gold, and then it's associated with the heavenly deities. So as I mentioned, the meaning of brown is mostly connected to protection, especially in the military context. And blue leads to thoughts about symbolic climbing into the heavens. And this is the end of my thesis, but as I continued to research a little bit more, I also added 2 other colors, and I researched the meaning of gray, which turned out to be the color of young men. So if young women are yellow, the young men are gray, and the animals that usually symbolize them are either yellow or gray. So young men are usually depicted as the hawk or the wolf. They're both gray-colored predators who then catch the yellow or the white animal that symbolizes the young maiden, and that's a symbolic meaning of the wedding. And the color green, as I was really interested when this color was appearing in the textiles, then I also thought that, well, I have to check whether the mythological meaning corresponds to this late appearance of green in the textiles. And there was some evidence of that. And at the same time, a lot of evidence was about that this, of course, is the color of the life force, eternal life and renewal, especially when we talk about the fir trees that don't miss their leaves or needles in the wintertime. And that is about it. What I wanted to tell you about. I'm open to the questions, and here is just a little bit of practical information where the book can be purchased and the price, and how this reconstructed costume may look like. This is probably the 12th century, end of the 12th century. So these are some illustrations from my book as well, what I was showing, and probably that's the main things what I wanted to say, and I can now give the floor to questions or to Angela and Francisco.
Thank you so much, Ieva, for your presentation. Very interesting, fascinating. I'd love to hear even more. Yeah, maybe you want to also put the link to the purchasing option like in the chat, because I think that would be quite helpful for quite a few people. Mm-hmm. And then of course, Francisco was too quick. And then of course, indeed, time for questions. I have of course some myself, but I would graciously wait for you to ask the questions. Andrea Cesari asks, can you tell if these colors are mordanted?
Well, in order to tell this, I would need to do chemical analysis. But what I have been doing is that I have looked at the colors through the microscope. And the microscope doesn't, of course, immediately tell you about the mordants. What we know is that the coloring or the dyeing methods sometimes include mordants. For example, dyeing with woad includes urine, and there is probably no other way they could have got this color. So in some cases, yes, they contain mordants, but not modern day mordants. Normally they are, as I mentioned, urine. Then there is wee bog water, sometimes also salt, such very ancient and accessible to everyone, moderns, not anything special.
Thanks. I think the next question is from Pragya Sharma. I hope I pronounce your name correctly. Do feel free to ask a question.
Yeah, I just thought I would ask on mic because I had a couple of questions.
Could you speak a bit louder?
We cannot hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Not very well. If you speak up a bit, I think that might do the trick.
Is it better now? Is it better?
A bit.
Yeah, I just came on mic because I had a couple of questions, and so I thought it would be better to ask here.
Yes.
Thanks, Ieva, for the amazing session. And I just wanted to share that while you were discussing the fable of Dark Night, that whole poem where the reference to the color blue is there, I could very much relate it to the Ajrak textile in India, where even the notion of the blue is coming from the stars and the moon, on a night sky. So I could very much relate to it. I just had a question. What if the color change over a period of time? So maybe the color that you come across is maybe not the original color. Has it ever happened to you that the color changes over a period of time, and the one that you are studying, maybe that's not the original color?
Yes, of course. I have written about the changes that have occurred to the colors after they have been buried for 1,000 years, and mostly they have disintegrated so much that it's not possible to tell the color from the study through the microscope. But there are these very well preserved pieces where it's possible to see the color, but at the same time, it's either darker or paler or more yellowish. And in order to find out how this color could have looked like in the original times, the best method is to look at the dyeing methods and to try to find out how these dyeing prescriptions would contribute to the color today. So experimenting or looking at the preserved examples of the dyed yarn with the traditional methods that have been collected by the ethnographers about 100 years ago.
Thanks. I think that this parallel for different areas of the world, of course, also having parallels in the symbolism of colors is quite interesting. Not quite sure if you compared that much, Ieva, by now. And next question is here also from Rie Herbert, were there practical reasons in terms of dyeing for the colors yellow and green being later than the others, which is, I think, a complementing question to the comment we just heard on there being a similar meaning of blue and the skies and the stars, and on the other hand we have changes over time in the use of color. Why is that? Were there practical reasons, or what were the reasons maybe?
Well, everybody who has done traditional dyeing with plant stuffs in Latvia, at least with our traditional methods, would agree that dyeing blue is the most difficult one. So apparently difficulty or how easy it was to dye a color was not determining which colors were most prestigious and which colors were most used. So apparently everybody who could afford it and had lots of jewelry in their grave wanted to have the most prestigious color, and that is the most difficult color to obtain, and that is the dark blue. But at the same time, I would say that there are some indications which I didn't mention, that, for example, gray color could have also been used in the everyday textiles and the textiles of the poor people as there is a lot of mentions of gray sheep in the folklore material. And as we all know, gray sheep's wool is very hard to dye. And this has lots of aspects, and probably I'm not able to tell about all this in just a couple of minutes, but at the same time, well, yes, there's lots of things that lead to other aspects that I could talk about.
Thank you. I think it's quite interesting still that yellow and green are just so much later than the others. It's quite fascinating, especially if you say that the yellow is actually quite important in the mythology, you know?
Well, yes, it is important. But at the same time, I think that green was in the mythology the color of life and the color of alive nature. And probably therefore it wasn't used because it was all around. At the same time, I have been reading, and I really enjoy the French historian Michel Pastoureau, who has studied the meaning of colors in Europe, that mostly belong to this Christian tradition. And apparently our tradition is quite far from that. But at the same time, I think that color green could have appeared earlier, at least for a couple of centuries earlier, only it didn't because the Latvian territory was part of the German, well, not exactly empire, but the German landlords were living in Latvia, and they were the main driving force of the innovations after this 13th century. And as their traditions came mainly from the German territories, so their meaning of colors and their symbolism also was influencing the appearance of these colors in Latvian material. So apparently, if the color green was considered the color of the devil and the color of everything bad in Europe in the 16th and the 17th century, according to Pastoureau, so apparently the Germans didn't accept this tradition of dyeing wool with green, and therefore the Latvians didn't follow that.
Fascinating. Another question also from Megan, do you look at undyed colors at all? Gray, white, black, and do they have a cultural meaning as well? I think you commented a bit on it, but if you could expand a bit more.
Well, yes, I commented on green, on gray, but I have not included white and black in the study, just because if I look at the Latvian folklore material, white and black are the most used colors. These are the colors, as we know, that come from the Stone Age. They are the oldest colors, and they have changed their meaning over time. And I think that if I would study white and black, which I have done just a little bit, but if I would study that thoroughly, that would be another book, as there is so much information and so much data. And therefore, as these two colors have never been dyed, well, white has never been dyed in Latvia, but black has not been dyed until the 19th century, I didn't include them in the study.
Okay, so basically we were waiting for the next book.
Well, I think I will, how to say, wait a little bit, because it just now feels that I have finished my PhD finally after so many years. So it feels like I need to do some other topics first. But I reserve the possibility to come back to that.
Yeah, we all hope you do, I guess. Okay, any more questions from the audience in between? I might just ask sort of, or like make an observation or ask a final question maybe, because I find it quite interesting that you said that some things might be there in the region and others might be imported. How much do represent these colors mobility or interaction, cultural interactions? You already commented a bit on the Christian part of it.
Well, we all know that, for example, the use of these same colors in the textiles is not unique to the Latvian territory. It's quite common also in Finland, in Estonia, in northeastern Russia, in Lithuania, in the Prussian lands of current-day Poland and previously Germany. And this tradition is of a larger area. So I hope that on the one hand, my study will help other researchers from these same areas to compare their material to what I have found. On the other hand, I would really like to read more about what others have found out, because I have been acquainted with the literature that's published already on this, but there is not very much, and I'm looking forward to other territories where people will do more thorough research. So then we'll be able to compare.
I think that
So
also
maybe
sort of,
Rina is next.
yeah, it's always a good thing to find others to future studies. Rina, come on. We have another
well,
question.
I have cited Rina, I think.
Yeah, I think in the beginning of the session you started also a short conversation on the use of colors in different regions. Rina, you want to comment?
No, but yes, I will write something about colors quite soon. I hope I will find the time.
Excellent.
Yes. And Megan has another question. Do you feel if you had more freedom in your interpretation of color and meanings because of the lack of historical iconographic sources, that you were free to let the textiles guide you rather than having to fit your interpretations into a pre-existing narrative, or more difficult? That is a quite interesting question, I think, how much we are predefined by our research environment, right?
Well, I was quite lucky that there was not very much research done before on this topic in this regard. But at the same time, I must say that, yes, I have encountered that previous research and previous conclusions on textile history influence us very much. And that is because I have been studying the textiles and especially dress of the 18th and 19th century for the last 4 years or more. And I can see that it takes a lot of time and a lot of research to sort of understand that, oh my goodness, this conclusion that was done probably 80 years ago or so is actually wrong, and that the data show something else. But we approach this material with the glasses that we wear, with what we have read from the previous researchers. And that's not a very easy process to sort of understand what really can be confirmed with data and what not.
Interesting also to hear how long you worked on the texts, because I think that needs to be appreciated, how much time research like yours actually takes. It is not something that you can do in a summer break, right? There's another question: were the dates of textiles, as mentioned in the table, purely based on archaeological evidence, referencing from archives, or adopted some other methodology?
What I used was the dating from the archaeological excavations and from the archaeologists who have researched the whole graveyard they have excavated. So I didn't date anything myself, and I only used what the others have used, and they have dated the material mostly because of the jewelry, because of the weapons and so on, textiles alone are very hard to date.
Interesting. Also then interesting how much an analysis is dependent also on certain types of evidence. You mentioned in the beginning that this is very much then something that is also linking to a social class, if jewelry is actually something for the upper classes, right? So there's some bias with it, of course, as well. But very interesting. Thank you so much for presenting your book. I'll start wrapping up unless there are any more questions here or people who want to comment, or maybe, I don't know, relate from their research. Of course, all of this is possible here. Oh yes, we do have another question of if C14 dating would be possible here.
As far as I know, textiles are not dated with C14 in Latvia, but other grave goods are. So there has been some adjustments of the previous dating sometimes, but mostly they concern earlier centuries, like before the Christ. Otherwise, I would say no, not so far.
Lina was nodding. Is there anything to comment from your area of expertise, or were like?
No, I just wanted to say yes, it would be possible, but it just they haven't done it.
Mm-hmm.
But the typologies of the jewelry is quite good because there are so many of them, so it's studied quite long. So I think that the C14 wouldn't change anything for the 12th century, for example.
Mm. They have adjusted dating of the Stone Age artifacts that are probably 12,000 years old or 10,000 years old, but not this late textiles or whatever.
Thanks. Okay, wonderful. Great discussion, great book. Some people already said they'll be looking forward to reading it. I myself too. It's great also that you published in 2 languages. Thank you so much for that. That is very helpful. I was a bit afraid that there would be only an English summary, and that would have been a bit not enough sort of to really dig in your research, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Ieva, you want to?
No. Well, when I was studying in Ireland, I discovered that, and also in Norway, I discovered that the cultural heritage and the material from Latvia is absolutely unknown to the rest of the world. And I presume that this is one of my tasks, to help to promote it and to let people know about it. And probably someone gets interested in that and comes to research it to Latvia someday. So let's hope for that. And that's why I wanted to have the text similar in Latvian and in English.
Yeah, I think that was a very good decision. And I think also that EuroWeb is actually kind of a nice framework to get something like this going, right? To connect to more people working on colors in different regions, as we also discussed here today. EuroWeb does have a group on terminologies, also on clothing, identities. So there are 2 of our 4 working groups. Another one is the fabric of society that you also touched upon, of course, with your presentation. So I think that this shows how many different aspects a work like yours covers also in the context of what we are doing in EuroWeb. And we are already now, I think, Francisco, you know maybe better, over 200 researchers who joined this cost action, which is running until 2024. It's 200 and many.
I think we're closer to 300 now, I guess. With the latest editions, the team has been growing quite a bit. Also, we have new countries since a few months back. So yeah, really large team, a lot of different expertises, and color is definitely something that crosses all the different working groups, all the different disciplinary areas that are represented in the team too. So it's a fascinating team. And that's just one other comment that I would like to do, is that wonderful images, wonderful material too. It's really, really lovely, and it really makes you want to just dig into the book and to just have it in your hands. So thank you very much for showing it to us today, Ieva.
And for those of you who are not part of EuroWeb yet and who are archaeologists or historians working on similar topics, there is, of course, the option of joining this cost action. And if that should be the case, of course, do get in touch with me, with Agata Olanoska, of course, who's our, as I said, leader of EuroWeb. Do get in touch somehow. Of course, you can also do that via the chat here, and follow our events and we are on social media, like everywhere, on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter and whatnot. And of course, we do hope to do presentations like the one today with Ieva again. I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for Ieva for agreeing to do this. Like a big fat applause for today's presentation.
Thank you.
And I think that would be all for today from the EuroWeb Book Corner. And I hope you have a good weekend and maybe see you around in EuroWeb or on another occasion.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. See you soon. Thank you, Ieva.
You're welcome.